vital resources are coming under fire in Kuwait today. Iran struck a power and desalination plant there, prompting urgent public warnings from the government. Those warnings were to conserve water and electricity even as temperatures soar into the mid-40s on the Celsius scale. Iran also says it targeted US assets in Oman, Jordan and elsewhere, and it is threatening the ports of its Gulf neighbours. This all coming after an escalation in US attacks, including strikes on bridges in the south of Iran in what was a sixth straight night of bombing. CNN's Nick Robertson joining us today from Jerusalem. And Nick, 30 days after the, very what felt like historic signing of that MOU, it does seem as if things have escalated in a way that makes it feel very uncomfortable in region. What do you make of these developments and where we are at?
I think, obviously, we're on an escalatory military cycle. I think that because neither side has said we're outrightly scrapping the MOU sort of remains marginalized completely on the sidelines of these military operations, but it's still a document that's intact, and one can possibly see a time where either side can recommend going back to that, having decided that through the military means at the moment they're not getting where they want to. So I think on the diplomatic front, that document, although it's no use to anyone at the moment, can be, again, useful in the future because it is the blueprint for the way out of the current situation. But if you just look at the range of these strikes that are going on and break it down very, very simply here, both sides have a reason for hitting the targets that they hit. Iran says it hits US military bases and assets in the region. Clearly, last night, it hit a civilian facility in Kuwait that is a huge vulnerability for all Gulf countries, the desalination and power plants that go with them that provide the AC, that provide the clean water that people drink. For most of the Gulf countries, these are absolutely essential and indispensable. So they're a massive pressure point. So Iran's ratcheted up to that level. If you look at what the United States is doing and understand how militaries work, they won't just be throwing their munitions around, we'll put some here, we'll put some there. They'll be thinking of what are we planning on doing next week? Where do we think we might be in a week's time or 2 weeks' time? So we'll have operations that shape us towards that. Number one, making sure that the Strait of Hormuz is going to be safe for the travel of vessels, which means taking out infrastructure, port facilities along the Strait of Hormuz, but it's going beyond that. It's trying to get to the infrastructure that links those areas around the Strait of Hormuz, particularly Bandar Abbas and some of the other ports along there, to deeper inside of Iran, as well as denying other ports, as well as targeting Bushehr, where there is an Iranian military airbase, which is about less than 1 minute's fighter jet flight from Karg Island, which again has been floated in the deep past as a possible target. That's where we seem to be.
Yeah, and Tehran issuing threats over the Gulf's oil lifeline at this point. It does seem as if it is, though, widening its target list. Syria, Iraq, Jordan. We already know that it's targeted Qatar, Kuwait, Bahrain, of course, and Oman. But I wonder what the message is here, do you think, from Iran in widening that lens, widening the scope of these targets outside of the Gulf?
Yeah, it's what's often called the escalatory ladder, isn't it? You target just a couple of Gulf countries in the beginning. It's been Kuwait, it was Bahrain. Now it's up to a former US base, Al Tanf, inside of Syria. That hadn't been struck before. It's interesting that Saudi Arabia hasn't been struck so far in this round, and Saudi Arabia normally considers itself at the top of that escalatory ladder. But Iran threatening to hit ports in the region, threatening these sort of highest value, most prized asset that's mostly been outside of the war in Saudi Arabia, Yambo port there, where the oil exports go through, where exports to the Red Sea and imports, frankly, as well, come into the country, come into the region, as well as Jebel Ali, a principal port in the Emirates where you are. That would be a huge blow for the Emiratis if Iran was to continue to go after that Hamad port in Qatar. Just a number of ports in the region. And I think if we think back to those days at the beginning of April, just before the ceasefire came into play, I think it was the 8th or 9th of April, what Iran did on the last night of strikes was to strike sort of the deepest and send significant messages of what it was still capable of. So it sent the warning then, and now it's saying, you know we can do this. We're putting it on the table. So yes, we're in a cycle of escalation.
Let's discuss this and more with CNN senior military analyst, the former NATO Supreme Allied Commander, retired Admiral James Stavridis. Admiral, thanks very much for joining us. Many of these bridges in Iran that were targeted by the U.S. were on routes connected to the city of Bandar Abbas, which is home to an Iranian military naval base, as you well know. What does that signal to you about the U.S. strategy that's unfolding right now?
Two things. Well, first, it is going to attempt to cut off, to kill the assets that could be used to close the Strait of Hormuz. I've been to Bandar Abbas before the revolution. Obviously, it's a very important naval port for the Iranians, and cutting it off has high military utility. So point one, go after the places where the Iranians have weapons systems that help them close the strait. Point two, in general, going after infrastructure like bridges, roads, puts economic pressure on Iran. I think that is part of the administration's strategy here to get Iran back to the table. In a phrase, what they're doing is escalate in order to de-escalate, meaning go after economic targets, military targets, put pressure on more attacks, with the hope that you can then de-escalate and the Iranians will come back to the table. That's the strategy.
And as you know, Iran is now retaliating big time with attacks on various U.S. military assets across the Gulf region. The Iranian military claims it targeted a U.S. air base in Qatar and for the first time a U.S. base in Syria. It also says it destroyed a long-range radar system and several U.S. refueling aircraft. If all of this is true, Admiral, how does this impact the U.S. military's abilities in the region?
So far, we have sufficient combat power in order to overcome the level of strikes you're seeing from Iran. And let's be honest here about the numbers. The U.S. is launching dozens and dozens of strikes a day at this point, far less than during the initial wave, but 100, 200 strikes a day. Iran is responding with 10, maybe 15 strikes. So over time, that's going to favor the U.S. military capacity to continue these strikes. However, it does show the Iranians are increasing their ability to go after their neighbors. That ought to concern us, because if they start going after Gulf oil and gas infrastructure, that'll have big economic downside for the Western economies as well.
Yeah, so far they're going after U.S. military sites in these friendly Arab Gulf nations like the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Kuwait, Oman, elsewhere in the region. These are all very close friends, allies of the United States. The U.S. has major bases in the United Arab Emirates and in Qatar at Camp Asaliya, the El Udeid Air Base. I've been to those facilities. They're really home to much of the U.S. military's central command in that region. And the Iranians keep attacking those U.S. sites. This is very significant, isn't it?
It is indeed. And I want to draw a line under one other kind of troubling item that's surfacing, and that is Iran starting to talk about closing not the Strait of Hormuz, which they've effectively done, but closing what is called the Bab el-Mandeb. It's at the very bottom of the map you're showing, at the bottom of the Arabian Peninsula, the bottom of the Red Sea. They've got the Houthis there who have capability to attack commercial shipping. If you close that choke point, that closes effectively the Suez Canal right under the word Israel on your map. That is a major global choke point, just like the Strait of Hormuz. If the Iranians can push the Houthis into doing that, you've opened a new front, a Western front, if you will, in this war. So that is one to watch and one to be concerned about in the weeks ahead.
In his address, his primetime televised address last night, the president said one sentence, and it was a total of about 7 seconds, we checked, related to the war with Iran in his nearly 27-minute speech overall. When he first announced he was going to give a televised address, I thought it would be on the war with Iran, but it wasn't. It was on election, so-called election interference. Was that, in your view, a missed opportunity for President Trump?
It was, and the numbers are very clear on this. This war is unpopular across the entire political spectrum. President Trump's own popularity overall is as low as it's been throughout his 2 terms of the presidency. And I think Americans just don't have a sense of what's the exit strategy, what's the end game here. And when you start getting those questions from the public, that's the time to do that nationally televised address and reassure people and tell them you have a plan and tell them what the next step is. I'm with you. That's what I was hoping to hear when I caught a snippet of a televised presidential address. It's about elections. Those are important, but I think the public would, at this point, like to hear what's the next move in the Middle East.
Yeah, in his 7 seconds on the war in Iran, he basically said the U.S. is winning. That was about it. All right, Admiral James Stavridis, thank you so much for joining us as usual.